Okay, so some really important news. Obviously, Dave covered it in my latest video. Is that the UK government has scrapped plans to allow fans to return to stadiums next week. The original plan was to have fans back in stadiums by the 1st of October. That's gone out the window, and it's important because there's going to be sports teams go out of business and athletes that have to retire, not because they're not fit enough to continue, but it's not financially viable to continue. We saw the Scottish government push back their fan returning date to the beginning of October from the middle of September. The Elite League come out and say, well, without fans in attendance, we're not going to have a season. We need 75% attendance average across the league to make the league viable and make things work. Well, I can't see. Well, I don't know when fans will be allowed back. These are all provisional dates, so this is all subject to change. And the UK government came out earlier in the summer. I think it was it August or was it July, saying October the 1st. And then the Scottish government came out and said we're going to have a 2 weeks earlier, and that hasn't happened. And obviously, discussions were being had with the sporting authorities for the Elite League to come out and say we need 75% fans in attendance, otherwise we're not going to have a season. So obviously, sports have to plan around this. And when the lockdown first came in, the owner of Huddersfield said 50 to 60 football league clubs will go bust. And we've already seen Southend United have a winding up petition delayed, I believe, until sometime next month. Macclesfield finally did get relegated and then went out of business. So we're already seeing the dominoes start to fall in English football. Scottish football, God knows what's going to happen without fans in attendance. What do I think about the Stanley Cup finals right now? Ironically, I've not watched a single playoff game. I've not watched a single NHL playoff game, not because I don't love the NHL. I've been focusing more on the NRL and occasionally catching the Super League if I can, but I've not watched a single NHL playoff game, and that's actually been found across the board when it comes to TV ratings. The problem the NHL has found is it's competing with other sports that take place at this time of year. Dallas and Tampa in the finals. They're on to game 2. Very interesting finals matchup. I don't think anyone would have had money on that. But what the NHL is finding is that they're competing against other sports that take place this time of year, and they're up for TV negotiations, I think, in 2021 at the end of the next season. So we don't know when the next season is going to start. They've got to work out scheduling, all sorts. So the NHL is coming up against Major League Baseball. The NBA is always being played in parallel with the NHL. And you've got the NFL there. Major League Soccer obviously had their mini tournament in Orlando. So the TV deal, kind of the TV companies, even the NFL and NBA have actually got less viewers than normal, because they're all competing against each other, when actually you would stagger these sports throughout the year. Also, overseas sport has actually had a massive impact on the American sporting conscious, with the AFL and NRL becoming quite popular over on ESPN, because they started up back in May. The NRL and then the AFL, I think, in June started up. So they had a head start on American sport. European football and rugby league took a long time to get started. So when it comes to the TV dollar, and I'll use that term for obviously the American viewers, that then makes things very, very interesting. What do I think of Paul Byron possibly being replaced by Conor Sheary from free agency? Again, I've really tuned out of the NHL and all the machinations about it, because there's other sports that I do watch this time of year when hockey isn't normally on, and I continue to watch them because that's the thing. I'm a massive rugby league fan as well, and the fact that the NRL in Australia managed to get started back in May, I've been watching it solidly since it resumed. I've pretty much, I think, watched all but I think a few handful of games, and this is where you can see positive discussions between government, sport, and health authorities to get sport back on. And then you see what's happening with the various discussions. We don't know what's going to if because the Big Ten college decided to come back and play. The rest of the colleges aren't playing American football, so that's going to affect the draft next year. There's been bubble breaches. We've seen positive tests across most. The NHL, I think, was the best sport in North America for returning to play and using the bubble city dynamic. But the mess of that sport in Europe and North America in comparison to Australia, Australia has shown what you can do when you have positive discussions and strong leadership with sports administrators, with government, with the health authorities, and how you can actually get sport, up and running as quickly as possible. I think they were out of action for 8 weeks. They couldn't play. I think it was 8 weeks. They 2 months shut down in Australia when it came to sport. Europe and North America, it took a lot longer. And well, you'll be surprised. A lot of people like the NRL and AFL, and they've actually got big TV audiences in North America. And you say no one's talking about them, but they were the first professional sports to get restarted, and they were the first country to get fans, alongside New Zealand, to get fans back into stadiums. They managed to start up Super Rugby competition in Australia, Super Rugby in New Zealand. They had fans in stadiums, and they're looking at possibly 50 to 75% capacity for the NRL and AFL grand finals. So, apart from the city of Melbourne, Australia's had what? How many positive? I think there's only 11 people in hospital with COVID in Australia right now outside Melbourne. And so, yes, you're going, oh, it's only Australian sport, but the fact they managed to reorganise TV deals, which normally takes 6 months, in 6 days for the NRL, they got fans back into stadiums within 5 weeks of resumption. They are increasing the capacity in stadiums each week. They worked out a shortened format to the season. They went, okay, we're going to just reconfigure the season. And then they had positive discussions with government, be it local government, state government, and national government, and they got it restarted. I think, it works. I believe the NHL will have to do a Canadian American division plan that was proposed recently. Bateman doesn't want to do it, but with how it's looking right now, I'd do that. The NHL is an interesting one when it comes to North American sport because it's got a higher proportion of Canadian teams. And the viewership figures in the playoffs highlight that. The Vegas, I think, was it Vegas, Vancouver, had the lowest viewership figures of all the playoff series, including the play-in rounds, compared to what was it? Was it Dallas? No, it wasn't Dallas. Nashville. I'm trying to think. The last Islanders series, Islanders Philadelphia had like 2.8 million US viewers. So the issue with the NHL is it does have a high proportion of Canadian teams out of the league. And it doesn't have a unified TV deal with the US networks. It's shown on multiple networks. And it is a difficult one. There has been proposals to have a Canadian division separate from 3 US divisions. But then Seattle joins and that creates a headache. You add the Seattle team to the Canadian. There's various ideas put on. At one point, I know it's as high as 60%, I think, or 40% are Canadian. It was as high as 60, 70%. At one point, players were Canadian, but you've got 7 teams in Canada out of soon to be 32. The highest percentage of players that play in the league, I think it's somewhere about 45 to 55% are Canadian, which creates an interesting, dynamic when it comes to TV rights and salary caps and all sorts. So the NHL is in a very unique and difficult position at the same time. It has the benefits of it did the bubble plan very, very well and restarted earlier and more successfully than Major League Baseball, for example, the NFL. It had better discussions with government. It had better planning to get resumed. The Philly New York Islanders series was the highest viewed series in 5 years, and that's a positive if you want to sell the product to the US TV networks. They want ESPN. I believe the NHL wants ESPN as the main broadcaster again, but we'll see what happens. The issue is you do have those 7 Canadian teams, and that's where you have the sticking block where your TV deal is going to be worth a lot less than the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, because they have only one Canadian team. This is what Major League Soccer has a pretty shocking TV deal as well. It's because it has more Canadian teams, and the Canadian dollar affects bits and pieces. It's it's in Europe. It's the second most popular sport continentally. That's across the whole continent for participation, fanship, viewership, TV deals. So actually, ironically, in Europe, it's the second sport after association football or soccer. But the difference is in Europe, it's heavily reliant on fans going to games. And as we found in the UK, and our top flight elite league is not taking place this season. They provisionally said no. We're provisionally suspending indefinitely the start of this season, is concerning for the future health of the game. The issue is, if you don't have fans in attendance, the sports will survive because there's school programs and university programs. The issue is, without fans in attendance, professional teams will fold. We're seeing that in European football. We're seeing that in English football, that teams are going out of business already. So the UK government's announcement and the French government's announcement of restricting fans in stadiums, I can't see fans in stadiums till next year at the earliest. And that's our hope. And that's me being optimistic there. When we're seeing sports governing bodies having to axe 20% of their budget, and that means hacking off 20% of their employees, that's a concern. When you're seeing sports have to go to the government and ask for emergency loans so they can survive, that is a concern. So without fans turning up, and this highlights, even with massive TV money, how important fans going to games actually are. And how, with the books fully opened and fully, well, you say football's too capitalist, but when you've got clubs like Manchester United, albeit their on-field struggles are well documented since Alex Ferguson left the club, okay? But if you look at their financial position, they're one of the best teams run as a business in the world. As a brand, as a business, Man United is a very profitable brand. If they are coming out and saying, without fans turning up to games, we're losing money of up to 5 million per day since the lockdown, that tells you the situation that they have. They've had no pre-season tours. That's cost them money. Old Trafford is the biggest stadium in the country, club stadium in the country. Imagine, playing games. It highlights how important fans actually are, and how, even with the massive TV deals they've signed over the last 28 years, that fans are crucial to the future health of the sport. And without fans there, the sport does suffer. And we're seeing that in English football right now. We're seeing it, and I always go back to Australia because it's an example that I know I have a lot of knowledge on, and I've watched a lot of Australian sport. They were very keen, as quickly as possible, to get fans back into stadiums and to mitigate some of the financial losses they were going to face. Because without fans in attendance, the players were going to have to take up to 78% pay cuts in the NRL. 78%. Didn't see any football players in Europe taking up to 78% pay cuts. I think Barcelona was an exception where they realised we are in severe financial difficulty. We're going to have to take temporary pay cuts. But the NRL players said we're willing to take we'll agree to. The players' union sat around the table, and this is when Todd Greenberg was still NRL CEO. He's now gone, and Andrew Abdo's in charge, and it's a much better organisation at the moment. But as soon as the players announced that, it was found that there had been massive financial mismanagement, and a third of the players' retirement fund that could have been used to assist players and dampen the blow somewhat and give players some kind of assistance financially was missing. It'd been misappropriated. And I think that was the moment. And then clubs were feeling there was a lack of transparency and lack of communication between the ARL Commission, which is Peter V'landys, Todd Greenberg, and discussions with they were giving out assistance loans to the clubs, and they underpaid them. So, right. But no, football is I wouldn't say it's too capitalist, but I think the way it's been governed and the way they financially dealt with the situation, association football has been a mess. There's been no unified plan across Europe with UEFA. UEFA said we want to, UEFA had this extraordinary meeting with all the FAs saying we want to get all the completion dates of leagues by this point. We want to get leagues restarted by this point or completed by this point. And half the leagues were like, well, we're actually just going to do it on our own back. We're going to decide the governor advised to do this and that. And then they said that we'll indefinitely suspend the Champions League and Europa League. We may not play the next season. Then they forced that through. There was no unified plan going forward. And now we've got players testing positive again. So that raises the concern about the integrity of the biosecurity protocols that the various football governing bodies have put in place. And it does raise concern about, what happens if there's multiple. Let's say Man City Wolves, okay? Now, Gundogan tested positive, or was announced as positive yesterday, about this time yesterday afternoon, or this time in the morning. They played Wolves last night. Now, what would be interesting to see if Wolves and Man City have more positive tests. If that becomes a reality, then the integrity of the football competition here in England and the various leagues and cups is then sharply brought into question. Do I think rugby? Now, I'm assuming you're talking about rugby union, rugby league, but rugby has massive governance issues across the board. Rugby league is a very bitty governance. It's more down to national governing bodies to rerun the international game is run poorly. The Super League and the NRL have different league structures. I mean, the European structure is promotion relegation. The NRL is we have the top tier. We then have the regional top tiers after that, and then you have juniors and the amateur game. I think sports governance as a whole, I think, has been exposed for how poor it is. Rugby union, I mean, Augustine Pichot was completely correct in his assessment that the top end talent has to take some kind of salary cut in order for the game to be more profitable, more financially viable, and then the lower levels professionals can get paid more. And he was defeated. And this is before COVID, and that was his proposal for his election. And they had the election during the height of COVID. And he was defeated. But what has been proven is his policies were the right idea for all sport. So I wouldn't say rugby is necessarily the best run sport in the world. There's massive issues with rugby union and world rugby, massive problems. I wouldn't say the NRL has managed COVID brilliantly this year. It's managed it better than the AFL because they got restarted sooner. They had better, more constructive discussions with the Queensland and New South Wales governments and the federal government in the bubble situation. They got the New Zealand Warriors over from New Zealand. They made, when Melbourne had issues with the rise in COVID, they moved Melbourne, I think, was it to the Central Coast. So they're working with two teams that are basically exiles from their home stadiums and their home fan bases. They've worked really well with the initial bubble plan and then getting fans back in stadiums. The AFL have done things well as well. But the fact that the NRL had to change CEO midway through the whole process, there's been multiple player lockdown breaches and coach lockdown breaches that have been really highly publicised, and it does nothing for the image of the game. But the AFL, I think the AFL have screwed up in certain areas. They were beaten on the restart plan. They were winning hearts and minds in the PR battle in the early weeks of lockdown, where the NRL, there were players misbehaving. There was a lack of trust between the clubs, the players, and Todd Greenberg. We found out with the players' retirement funds being short in cash. We found out when the NRL and Todd Greenberg announced we're going to give financial assistance to the clubs and players during the first, I think, 8 weeks of lockdown, which ended up being short in cash, and they had to do a second payment because they didn't pay money that they should have to the clubs and players. He then resigned because the clubs found there was a lack of transparency. And the chief financial officer's gone as well. Andrew Abdo, who was the commercial officer, steps up. He's been now made permanent. Peter V'landys is obviously having these discussions with the TV companies about TV rights, both domestically and abroad, with TV partners. And he's taking Andrew Abdo to these meetings rather than Todd Greenberg. So the NRL did have to have a massive shake-up. The fact they did it in the middle of the pandemic, I mean, it was a concern. But, there were some battles the NRL had to overcome. The fact that they've done them on the run, they've improved the quality of the game with rule changes. They're doing some more experimental rule changes in 2 matches this weekend with the 6 again rule and scrums, which may or may not work, but they're trying them. They're trialing a few things for the next coming seasons. I think is interesting. But the way they got the game resumed, and played, and then they got fans back, and now they're having positive discussions with both Queensland and New South Wales about increasing the capacity of stadiums, much like the AFL. The AFL have made some blunders in relation to things. But I wouldn't say the NRL has managed COVID brilliantly. There's been a lot of missteps along the way, and there's been a lot of negative headlines with players and coaches breaching the lockdown protocols, and there's some interesting things highlighted with mismanagement at NRL headquarters that's been going on for a long time. Because with these billion-dollar TV deals, where's all the money gone? They've got no assets. The game's broke, and questions have to be asked about the deals that were signed with the ARL Commission being set up in 2012. Like, there has to be questions asked about where that money went for the Players' Retirement Fund, why the NRL mispaid the assistance funds to clubs and players that were short cash. These questions, do have to be answered. And yes, Todd Greenberg's gone, but how many more CEOs will we have in the game? So NRL government has been haphazard for years. How many more CEOs will the NRL? I think it's been 4 in 8 years or something. We're now on our 5th. If we're talking about NRL fans and the sport, we're now on our 5th CEO in 8 years. So that in itself, the concern is there is long-term governments and stability in head office. Do I think Parramatta will beat the Tigers this week? Oh, that's an open-ended question. You look at the Raiders. The Raiders had an opportunity to finish 4th and make their finals run easier, because to win outside the 4 is nearly impossible to win the grand final. And he's Ricky Stewart. I'm a Raiders fan. He's rested 9 players, which is a head scratcher. Parramatta, they've been too stop-start in attack. They're not free-flowing. I think the Brisbane game will give them some confidence, but it's Benji Marshall's last game as a West Tiger. And in attack, the West Tigers do have a lot of threats going forward. It's defence. I think both sides' defence has been a bit leaky in recent weeks, and Parramatta aren't scoring enough. So that'll be a very interesting game. It's a derby match as well, so it'll be tough, I think, for Parramatta. And if the Raiders do get a win against Cronulla and Para lose, the points differential is in the favour of the Raiders. So Parramatta have to win this game. I think the pressure's on Parramatta. West Tigers is no pressure. Canberra, I think they're going to have too much for Cronulla. I think that, with the amount of injuries. But this is the key game in the top 8, really. Premier League is too capitalist. The German League is better. The fans own a proportion of their clubs. They have a greater say than how the Premier League is run. They don't own the clubs entirely. They just have a greater proportion of ownership stake. But I do think the German system is far better in clubs, how they're run, and it's a European thing. You'll notice the sporting club dynamic where you elect a club president. Same in Spain. To a certain point in Italy, there's a bit more fan involvement at some clubs. Austria is the same as Germany. Ironically, there's a lot more fan involvement in how teams are run. You become a club member and you can have a say on who's the chairman, who's the chief executive. You vote in club presidents to run. It's run on democratic grounds. Ironically, it's very interesting, the club dynamic and the system. Does that make for better football? It makes for better team ownership and better club finances. There's been a massive shift into the way of running the clubs this way over 20, 30 years. More clubs do it in Germany. Not every club does it in Germany, but there's definitely more fan involvement, and I think that's written into the German Football Association's constitution. Is fans do have a greater say in how teams are run and who club presidents are, who club CEOs are. They regularly involve fans in the decision-making process. Should we invest in our stadium? Should we invest in our training facilities? How much money do we spend on these things? So yes, fans, and the ticket prices are far lower, far lower in for an average league game, percentage-wise. I think there is. I can't remember what the average ticket price is, but I know it's significant. I mean, I have enough money in my wallet right now to go to a German league game. Let's just say that I've got about, I think, 15, 20 quid floating around in my wallet. That's enough for an average ticket price, I believe. So if I was to convert that in euros, I could afford a standard ticket at Dortmund, for example, or Wolfsburg. The cost of going to a foot match in Germany is significantly cheaper in the top flight Bundesliga than going to a Premier League game. I know that for a fact. I think Wasps are in massive risk of going bankrupt. They were making big losses before COVID. Wasps are in a situation where they now own the Ricoh. And I've had debates about the situation with the Ricoh Arena for years on this channel, and how I don't know the whole situation with Sisu and the Coventry City fund, or the Coventry Council, city fund and stuff like that. The Ricoh Arena has been a nightmare since the day it was built. Coventry City Football Club have found that out. Wasps obviously moved from London, and not all fans were on board with that. And yes, there's already a rugby union and rugby league club in Coventry, and there's a football club, and you're moving a team there and relocating a team and saying we're now going London Wasps. There's going to be Wasps. Just call them Coventry Wasps then. Merge Wasps with the rugby union club in. I forget what the bloody rugby union club's nickname is now, but the issue is the Ricoh has been a nightmare from the day it was conceived and built. There's been issues with the ownership of that stadium. I believe now Wasps fully own the Ricoh. There's been issues where they haven't renewed the rental lease with Coventry City, which has cost them money, ironically, because they couldn't come to an agreement with Coventry City's owners over, playing games there. The situation with Wasps, though, is I'm not fully aware of the ins and outs, but with what happened with Saracens and the salary cap breaches, and what we now know about rugby finances coming through this pandemic, is they were nowhere near as stable as they should have been. And there's been concerns about rugby union's finances for the last couple of years. There have been concerns about the long-term finances of the game, and this is again where Augustin Pichot came out and said, to make the game more sustainable and more profitable, the top-end talent has to take a pay cut permanently, not because of COVID. And he was saying this in the build-up last year to the World Rugby election against Bill Beaumont. His manifesto, and Augustin Pichot has said this for a very, very long time. It's professional rugby. Yes, we want to grow the game professionally, make more countries fully professional, more professional leagues. So the Major League Rugby in North America and South American Major League Rugby as well, as a South American competition coming along. And the quality of rugby being played in the Americas is improving. And Pichot was one of the guys driving the force behind that. He was the ideas guy behind growing the game. He brought the Jaguares and Argentina into the Super Rugby competition and the World Rugby competition in the Southern Hemisphere, making from the Tri Nations to the Championship, Rugby Championship. Pichot was a driving force behind that. But he did say that the top end talent has to take pay cuts, and it has to be more permanent. They have to take smaller wage rises long term, or they have to take less pay in the short to medium term to make the sport more sustainable long term, more financially viable, and the sport will grow. And now we're seeing rugby union clubs really announcing massive financial strains and concerns. And then the Saracens thing broke over Christmas, where we already knew that there were investigations into possible salary cap breaches, and it did turn out that they were long-term breaches that had been systemic for a very, very long time. But Augustin Pichot, a key figure in World Rugby, is saying, look, I'm going to run for the election. I'm going to run on a mandate saying that we need to restructure the finances. And he's been proven right. Ironically, he's been proven right. Bill Beaumont gets elected for yet another term. And he got frustrated with the old boys club and how, thinking outside the box is not acceptable in rugby union. And he's quit the organisation, which I think is a loss to World Rugby. But Augustin Pichot, with his brain and his knowledge, and he sometimes thinks outside the box, could be useful to any sporting governance. He could be used in rugby league, football, cricket. You could use him in ice hockey. You could use him in the American sports. As a sports administrator and an ideas guy, World Rugby's lost his other sports game. Really is. I can understand his point of view, and I can understand why people voted against some of his proposals. I can understand that. Oh, are you talking about Bernard Laporte, the former French coach who then became involved with the French Ministry of Sport and High Performance? If Bernard Laporte, if Bernard Laporte, yes. French politics, this is a known thing. I mean, Jacques Chirac, the most popular French president in the modern era, after President Mitterrand was found guilty of corruption charges, but didn't go to prison because of his age and his and all that. Yeah, but, look, this is the concern. Now, Bernard Laporte obviously was involved with the Sarkozy government after he retired from the French coaching role. The French corruption, when it comes to like legal system and things like corruption, it's a very slow process. If some of you guys may have been subscribers to the channel in the early days when I mentioned that Newcastle United were involved in a tax fraud investigation that was French led, that was 3 years ago, over 3 years ago. 3 years later, we're still discussing the failed Newcastle takeover bids that have collapsed. We're still discussing Mike Ashley and trying to sell this club. And there's been concerns about who runs the club, the finances, where's this money coming from? If Bernard Laporte's been investigated by the French prosecutor, if the Newcastle United takeover has been hamstrung by concerns about where the money comes from, but also a French tax fraud investigation involving French football from the top tier all the way through the professional ranks in French football that now links to other European clubs, including Newcastle, Chelsea, and West Ham. And that was 3 years ago, and we're still discussing that, but no one wants to talk about it. But it's still in the background because the investigation hasn't been closed. It's still an open investigation. It shows you how long they're going to be investigating Bernard Laporte. And he's a far more important figure than Newcastle United in French circles. The French rugby public love him. They do. They love Bernard Laporte. But yeah, there's been a few rumours that there's a lot of corruption in French rugby union for quite some time. And the fact that he's the deputy to Bill Beaumont, you can see Augustin Pichot's frustration with how they org. So when people say, "Oh, rugby union's the best run sport in the world," no, it's not. It really isn't. It hasn't dealt with COVID very well at all. It's really been hammered with COVID. Some of the decisions World Rugby has made are head scratching. Professionalism hasn't universally benefited the game. And when you have key figures in the game butting heads over very simple policy, and then you lose a key member of rugby's administration out of the sport completely, where he's got to give up with this. I've lost faith in the organisation. In Augustin Pichot, when some of his standing in the game has gone, he resigned in frustration about how rugby is dealing with it. He lost the election, fair enough, but he waited in the organisation for 3 months and then he resigned, citing frustration with the direction the governing body is taking, because he's instrumental in bringing more professionalism to the game. But he got frustrated in how the sport is governed, and that tells you that things aren't all well in rugby union. And if Bernard Laporte is being investigated, that is deeply concerning. Now, it depends who's investigating him. So I'm going to have to do some digging on Bernard Laporte and his corruption investigations, but it is deeply concerning that someone very high up in rugby union is under investigation. But at the same time, it doesn't surprise me. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is regularly had corruption allegations. FIFA, obviously, we know what's happened there. We've seen corruption allegations labelled against domestic football associations such as Italy and Germany and the UK, and Spain and France, Turkey and Greece. And so this is nothing new in sports administration. But when it is someone so high up, who's also been involved in politics, but so high up, and in a very, I wouldn't say emotionally charged election campaign, but a very, I wouldn't say necessarily divisive, but crucial election campaign where you've got the old order with Bill Beaumont and the new order with Pichot. And Pichot had not long retired as a player. Let's remember that. He only retired in 2007, so he was only 12 years retired. And he didn't go straight into sports administration, but he did fight Argentina's corner for growing professionalism. He did fight to expand the game in North and South America and in Japan. He did fight hard for the expansion of the game professionally. When he was saying that he's frustrated with the organisation, and he feels as if the organisation isn't reforming itself and isn't taking all the ideas on board. Yes, okay, a bit of petulance, but at the same time, it is an insight into a recently retired player raising concerns about the future health of the game. And his concerns on finance were very valid, very valid. And now we're seeing it in the club game. We are seeing Augustine Pichot's concerns about rugby union finances in the club game playing out. And he's been proven right in that sense that the game, I mean, if the amount of clubs that have got themselves into financial difficulty is alarming. And you look at Super Rugby, game in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa is not as healthy as the Sanazar nations would let you believe. There's a reason why 2 South African clubs have now joined the Pro League. There's a reason why crowd numbers are down. There's a reason why even in New Zealand, the initial weeks that Super Rugby Aotearoa came back, yeah, they were filling out stadiums, but then very quickly interest dwindled somewhat, and attendances did slowly level off. Australian rugby union's an utter shambles. Got no money. And the Ryling Castle era, I mean, the battles with Israel Folau and the fact they overpaid rugby league talent to switch codes and were basically mercenary players in order for them to try and win the Rugby World Cup, and they failed and they got worse in that 5-year cycle, tells you something about the thinking behind Rugby Australia's policies. Disappointing World Cup by their standards, taking a backward step. And the massive losses and the losses of players, the bleeding of talent. So rugby union has massive, massive hurdles to overcome. And then you look at the Northern Hemisphere unions laying off staff and announcing huge losses, ruinous losses. If that was a standalone business, that business would be bust. And concerns about, salary caps, being unenforceable or flouted, and then the Saracen. I think the Saracen situation highlighted that the governance of the sport had been weak for a long time, and Saracens are not the only club who've been flouting the salary cap. They just did it so blatantly that and when they got caught, it was so obvious that what they'd been doing for such a long period of time. But the issues with rugby union is such that French rugby, the club game has damaged the international team with too many overseas players. The salary cap system has clearly been abused for a very, very long time, both in France and in the UK, in Ireland and Italy. There's clearly been abuses of the salary cap system that are blatant and are long-standing. I think the same could be said in Super Rugby as well, that the salary cap system is there, but it's blatantly abused. The same could be said of the NRL and the AFL. I think the AFL deals with the salary cap far better because the way they punish Carlton with their salary cap breaches, the team has never fully recovered from being their punishment that they sustained. The NRL, I mean, crikey, the punishments, teams continue regularly flout salary cap because the salary cap that they have in the NRL is designed for a draft system similar to the North American sports, but they don't have a draft system, so it's already an already flawed system. And the punishments don't match the crimes because the teams that get punished for salary cap breaches are still reasonably competitive within a couple of years, whereas Carlton in the AFL have never really recovered to the same extent. So salary caps are there for a reason. They are regularly breached. The fact that Wasps are making losses as a standalone situation is concerning, but you could argue that the Rico situation has something to do with that. Something has a lot to do with the situation. I would argue not having the Coventry City money from leasing the ground for match days would be a massive blow financially. And that, I think, has contributed to some of their financial woes is the disagreements with Coventry City about usage of the stadium. Obviously, they purchased the stadium as well, so they've got to pay off that cost. purchasing the real estate. But the Ricoh's been a curse since it opened and since it was being built. It's been nothing but a nightmare for the people who use it. Ask Coventry City fans about the situation. And now if Wasps are in the same mess financially going forward, is it sustainable for them to stay in Coventry? I mean, but I think rugby union, a lot of clubs are up against the wall right now. And I think Saracens are in how they're going to survive long term is going to be interesting because they're re-signing a lot of their star international players. And does that create a competitive level playing field in the championship with the state of rugby finances? Because at the lower levels, rugby finances are very precarious for rugby union and rugby league as well. But I don't know. On the Laporte side of things, I'm going to have to quickly check up on what he's actually been investigated for, because there has been rumours floating around that there's corruption allegations that have surrounded him since his retirement as the French head coach, going into French government as an advisor. But let's have a look. Corruption. See. Let's see what he's actually being investigated for, because I've heard rumours that he's had French anti-fraud over Altrad. This goes back quite some time with Bernard Laporte. Quite some time. And there was another one back in 2007. 2007. Remember this? That's 12 years ago, almost to the day, during the French Rugby World Cup. Laporte claimed there was little substance to the allegations. Financial corruption, according to L'Equipe. Police raided the French rugby headquarters 2.5 years ago in 2018. Wow, so he's had a fair few corruption allegations, not just the Altrad ones. We're going back. 12 years. There's been allegations of corruption allegations against Bernard Laporte. So 12 years he's had allegations of corruption labelled against him, from his time as French coach all the way through to his time working with the Sarkozy government to World Rugby. He's had allegations of corruption against him. Right. French Rugby Federation chief Bernard Laporte is to be interviewed by anti-fraud squad on Tuesday, which is today, over links to Montpellier owner Mahed Altrad, according to sources. So Montpellier is a key club, obviously in the top 14. Laporte will be interviewed in the framework of a preliminary investigation opened 3 years ago by the French Financial Prosecution Office, the PNF, following by a report by Sports Ministry inspectors. Laporte is suspected of pressuring the Rugby Federation's Appeals Committee to reduce a sanction against Montpellier, owned by businessman Altrad, who owns the Altrad Group, current sponsors of the France national team. So there you go. That's interesting. I'll get onto the Coventry and Wasp situation in a minute. He eventually... Okay, so Laporte, vice president of World Rugby, was accused of favouritism after it emerged that a company he owns had signed an image rights contract with the Altrad Group 3 years ago, in early 2017. He eventually pulled out of the €150,000 deal, but the case was investigated by the French Sports Ministry before being passed to the public prosecutor. Contacted by AFP on Monday, neither Laporte nor the Federation wished to make any comment. Laporte's scheduled appearance before the fraud squad comes just 2 weeks before elections for the Federation presidency, in which Laporte, who was the French Secretary of State for Sports from 2007 to 2009, will run against main rival Florian Grill. Laporte, former France and Toulon coach, was first elected to the top federation post 4 years ago, 2016, and victory on October the 3rd would make him boss of French rugby with the country to host the World Cup in 2023. So that's the latest corruption allegations. Let's go look at the Telegraph from 12 years ago. 12 years ago. We're going back to October 2007, 19th of October. I'll go away. I want to read the news. Fuck off. Fucking thing. Right. So the New Zealand Herald. So we're going on the 20th of October because the Telegraph is not letting me read. So we're going back 12 years. Laporte is suspected of corrupt financial dealings. Key points. Paris French rugby coach Bernard Laporte could soon be prosecuted for financial corruption, according to L'Équipe, which is a major sports publication in France. Laporte becomes a junior sports minister in the French government, which he did for 2 years, following France's World Cup third place playoff against Argentina, which they lost, has, according to L'Équipe, been under investigation for a year. So this goes back to 2016. The paper claimed that the DNF might hand over evidence to the justice system after they allegedly found evidence of financial corruption on many fronts. Though Laporte, interviewed by the newspaper, which claimed to know detailed information on his numerous financial affairs, did not deny the DNEF, which is the Corruption Office, inquiries. He disputed corruption claims. Laporte claimed there was little substance to the allegations. I know there will not be a lot in them. In any case, it's the companies which are being investigated, not me personally. French Sports Minister Roselyne Bachelot, who will be working with Laporte from Monday, which is back in, obviously, 2007, did not want to comment on the revelations while travelling to southern France, French town of Nîmes. Government spokesman David Martinon, he was the spokesman at the time for Sarkozy, said there was no reason to believe Laporte would take up his new post. I'm not aware of the matter, but Bernard Laporte's nomination has already been made and there's no reason to go back on that decision. Laporte came in for criticism at the start of the World Cup early last month when press reports claimed one of his companies was selling French shirts signed by him in violations of agreements with French Rugby Federation. One of Laporte's associates took complete responsibility for the error, however. So even as far back as 2007, Bernard Laporte was being investigated for corruption. There was another one. Police raid French rugby headquarters back in 2018 it was the National Financial Prosecutor's Office ordered the police searches back in January 2018. Is this linked to the what's this? Yeah, that's to do with the Altrad investigation. There's World Rugby rubbishes bribery allegations in the election race when Pichot lost, and I think it's one of the reasons why Pichot resigned. Again, Laporte involved in that. Damning report released on World Rugby elections back in July of this year. Yeah, there were allegations of corruption during the election of Bill Beaumont. So Bernard Laporte's been facing corruption allegations for 12 years on two separate fronts. I knew there was always allegations that he was a bit dodgy, but it doesn't surprise me with Bernard Laporte. It doesn't surprise me with World Rugby. If anyone thinks World Rugby is one of the best governing bodies, it's turning into FIFA. It's a baby FIFA. The massive expansion professionally of the game in the last 10, 15 years is deeply concerning about how it's governed. On the Coventry side of things, yes, the Ricoh is one of these stadiums banking on the Rugby League World Cup this time next year, and the Commonwealth Games as well. But I think because Wasps now own the stadium, they're the ones who are now dealing with all the contracts to allow the Rugby League World Cup to play there, to allow the Commonwealth Games to use that venue, because the Ricoh is obviously now in their hands. And I think it was the Coventry Development Fund, whatever it was, owned the stadium for a couple of years, and then it was owned by another ownership group, and then Coventry City had issues, and then Wasps moved up from London to the Ricoh. I think with what's happened with Coventry shows the issue that sports teams face. Either you rent your stadium or you own your stadium, and even when you own your own stadium, it's not always pretty, and it does come with financial risks. Including debt. Look at Arsenal; it's taken them years to pay off that stadium. Tottenham are going to have the same problem that Arsenal had with the Emirates, with the new White Hart Lane. They haven't got naming rights for it yet. They still haven't got a main sponsor. They're not going to have any NFL games there this year, and they've just signed Gareth Bale on massive money per week on a weekly wage, where they're not paying the full weekly wage, but they're still earning more than the other top talent at the club. But sports teams find this all the time. The amount of teams that don't own their stadiums or arenas is higher than you think. They're tenants, and they have to pay a fee to the arena or stadium operator, and that costs money. And you have to budget that into your profits and losses. And again, I'll go back to the NRL. Only one NRL team actually owns their stadium, and that's Cronulla, and they're redeveloping their stadium over a 3-year period. All the other 15 teams lease the space that they play in. They don't own their stadiums. They rent the space of either private or state ownership. So stadium ownership is a big big debating point in professional sport. But on the side of Laporte being investigated, he's been investigated for corruption dating back 12 years. 12 years, there's been investigations into Bernard Laporte and corruption claims for dating back to when he was France coach, before he entered politics as a junior minister for sport for 2 years. There's been allegations about Bernard Laporte going back a long, long time. So when I was asked the question, is rugby the best run sport in the world? Then the answer is no. I think it's turning into what FIFA became in the mid 2010s, when it all came out how corrupt FIFA actually was with the Qatar World Cup bid and the Russia World Cup bids, and the amount of bribery involved in getting those World Cups awarded. The fact that there's allegations of bribery during the recent World Rugby elections is deeply concerning. And there's obviously a lot of truth to that. I'm pretty naive to go, no, rugby union isn't the same, but it really is. It's now a multi-billion-dollar sport. It's not amateur anymore. It's fully professional at the top level. The best players are professional and earning decent money. Be clear about that. Maybe not as much as football players, but they're earning decent money in comparison to other sports athletes. They've got some sizable TV deals. There's some big money now in rugby union. And the concern is that, and as we've seen with Augustine Pichot, the frustrations he had with the governing body and walking away from it. Oh, that's my neighbour doing some gardening. I thought someone was banging on the window. It's just my neighbour doing some gardening. The frustrations that Augustine Pichot had with when he walked away from the governing body tell you everything I think you need to know about the situation that World Rugby finds itself in right now. On the Coventry side of things, I think it's pretty clear that the stadium is a big sticking point and a big issue. And it's not just Coventry City's problem, it's also Wasps. Wasps may own the stadium. And they may get decent crowds when fans obviously are allowed into attendance. But that doesn't mean long term that stadium is sustainable, because there's a lot of issues that come with that stadium. And I do think the Rugby League World Cup, we'll have to see if it does go ahead with fans attendance, if it goes ahead at all. Because that's a lot of players you have to bring into the country, who then have to quarantine, who then have to be in an isolation bubble if we have to go down that path. And that's a lot of venues that are listed. I mean, there's a lot of money banking on this. The future of the game and the sport in this country, and growing it outside the traditional areas, this World Cup is key to that. And getting fans in the stadium is key to that. And a good TV audience is key to that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Rugby League World Cup next year. And it'd be interesting. I mean, because back in 2018, they couldn't fill the whole city. The KC Stadium. They couldn't fill a key rugby league hotbed. The two Super League clubs play in Hull. They couldn't fill that stadium. So there, and that was the New Zealand tour. That to me says there's concerns about the exposure the sport gets, the amount of advertising, the ticket price, the promotion of it. So yeah, to me, there's definitely a concern about how the sport's governed by the RFL. And there's been, concerns that the RFL have mismanaged the sport catastrophically, much like World Rugby. And the fact they had to go get a loan from the government tells you we need to know about the RFL's position financially. It's not great. And you just have to look at the Wolfpack situation. They took it was a big risk, and I think the issue with the Wolfpack, I think, it was a vanity project back in 2015, 2016, and I don't think it's actually had the positive outcomes it should have. You look at it, and the team had issues signing players. People didn't take this team seriously. And yeah, it did things the hard way. went through League One and the Championship, and it took 2 attempts to get out of the Championship. So it wasn't all a fairy tale. They get to the Super League, they only play 5 games. They have issues in recruiting players. They have issues in squad depth. COVID comes along, and the visa issue, which had already dogged the team from its inception, really starts to cause problems. And the team, while it hasn't folded, has not resumed play. So whether the Toronto Wolfpack actually field a team next season, we'll have to wait and see. But there are travel restrictions in place. And then you have to then factor in signing players. Who's going to want to play for a team where the future is uncertain? Regardless of how good or bad the team is, what kind of player is going to go, right, I'm going to sign for this team. I want to play rugby league. The team isn't certain if it's going to, survive. And if like the Southern Kings have gone out of business as an ex-Super Rugby franchise and a Pro 14, it tells you all you need to know about rugby's finances and how the sport is not necessarily governed as well as it should. If the Cheetahs go out of business, then that tells you that there's massive, massive problems, because the Cheetahs are a solid former Super Rugby franchise. The Southern Kings were always the whipping boys anyway. They were not great in the Pro League. Their first season they were really poor. And but this is the thing. These are the two weakest Super Rugby franchises that South Africa had. Now, whether the 3 remaining Super Rugby franchises stay within the San-Azar setup, or whether they actually do look to Europe long term for their club rugby, is an interesting point. But it does highlight the issues that rugby union is facing. The fact that Australia and New Zealand got their Super Rugby competitions up and running is key. The fact that South Africa only this weekend finally got the sport up and running again tells you all you need to know. Sport is religion in South Africa. Doesn't matter what sport it is and what community you're from, it is a religion. But I think the fact that they were already playing in the Pro League and they weren't competitive tells you all you need to know about the teams that decided to go to the Northern Hemisphere to play games. And I think the travel costs killed them as well. But not playing games and then not resuming play is tells you all you need to know about the situation that they found themselves in. So if we're seeing teams already go out of business within 7 months, and not resuming play, so the Cheetahs, the Southern Kings, the Wolfpack, Macclesfield Town, winding up all against Southend, it doesn't matter the level of professionalism and the level of money that these teams generate and their value. If you're seeing professional sports teams in top level professional competition going out of business, that is a concern long term for the future health of sport. And you look at the teams that are struggling. These are sports mad countries and societies. Canada, yes, it's more NHL is the main sport, and ice hockey is the main thing, but it's irrelevant. When you've got teams that play in the top level in the competition that they play in, so they're playing a top level competition, and they're not financially viable, or they've got financial strains going into this that have been exposed, it shows you what's wrong with the sports governance, the financial structures, and why good governance is key for financial health. We could end up with unviable leagues because so many teams have folded. And that is a legitimate, fair concern. That is a legitimate concern that should not be discounted. That we could end up with teams where half the league has gone bust or had to mothball or cannot resume play next season for whatever reason. The team name may exist and the fan base may still be there, but for financial reasons, until fans are allowed back in, they cannot compete. And if teams are actually going completely out of business, we're already seeing that in the last week or so. It's happening. And the uncertain future about the Wolfpack resuming play next year is a legitimate reality. And you could blame the RFL for having a vanity project that they didn't really fully back. They just sort of came up with an idea around a boardroom table, thought it was a good idea, tried to force it through. It hasn't really worked. Let's be honest. Not everyone's bought in. I mean, the Canadian Toronto fan base has, but the rest of the rugby league fraternity hasn't really bought in. And you could look at the governing body, the RFL, being a little bit too old boys club. But yeah, we could see a lot of rugby league teams go to the wall in the Super League structure. We could see a lot of rugby union teams. I mean, if Wasps are announcing massive financial problems and the Southern Kings have gone and the Cheetahs could go, I mean, that tells you all you need to know. Welsh rugby, I mean, we know the Welsh provinces are already in financial difficulty before COVID. Well, to be fair, real estate is worth something. I think real estate's worth a fair amount. I mean, the Cronulla Sharks, and I go back to the NRL, people go, oh, why are you talking? They're the only team to own assets in a large proportion of their training ground. They own a lot of assets. They've sold a lot of assets to free up money to then invest in refurbing their stadium and pay off a lot of their debts. They were an asset-rich club that was cash-stripped, and they flipped that and they sold a lot of their assets at a decent price to pay off their debts and some of their losses, but also invest in rebuilding their stadium. So if you have a lot of assets, it can be to your advantage in the short to medium term to remove some of the debt burden. The problem is you then lost those assets long term. So, but this is the issue: is that high level professional teams, and these are businesses, have been financially mismanaged for a very long time. And the reason why they've been financially mismanaged for a very long time is the governance side of the sport, be it the governing bodies have been pretty lax in rules in place to make sure we don't end up in this situation. And yeah, the sports, as I say, will survive. Rugby league will still be played in schools at amateur level. Rugby union, same. Cricket, same. Football, obviously, I think will survive, but will be in a very different footballing landscape. I can't think it will survive long term in the structures that are in place. So these sports will survive. Be it have to restart at amateur level and start from the ground up again, they will survive. But in what shape they survive in, and how many of the professional teams and how many athletes in the individualistic sports have to go, it's not financially viable for me to be a professional athlete anymore. I have to go back into the mainstream working environment because it's not financially viable to keep doing what I'm doing. A lot of teams will go out of business. A lot of athletes will have to retire from competition because it's no longer viable with sponsorship drying up and funding drying up. This is what's going to happen. And prize money drying up. It's going to happen. The situation we find ourselves in is the financial mismanagement that has been disgusting. The amount of money sloshing around, there's been so much mismanagement financially, and massive overspend and unsustainable financial structures. It's really been highlighted in the last 7 months. And I use the NRL as a prime example. I use the CFL as another example. Right? The CFL is a very cash-strapped league. It came to the unfortunate decision back in early August, we cannot resume play for this season. It's just not viable. We need fans in the stadium in stadiums of a minimum capacity to make any money or to mitigate the losses. The Elite League, we need 75% capacity in our arenas to break even or to make a small profit to keep the sport profitable. Indefinitely suspending play. The Wolfpack withdrawing from competition for a variety of reasons. Visa issues were one, but other issues as well. Clubs going out of business in English football and facing winding upwards. Yes, a lot of this is down to poor sports governance. The NRL has shown a lot of issues of poor governance, but also some pretty good evidence of good governance. Weak governance for a long period of time. 4 different CEOs in about 12 years. We're now on our 5th. Peter V'landys comes in just before the pandemic. I think it was January or December. He came in as the new rugby league chairman. Within 3 months, competition suspended. Massive financial losses are predicted. Within another month, his CEO's gone, the NRL, out the door. There's been exposures of financial mismanagement at head office in the NRL. Appoints a temporary successor who becomes full-time, and Andrew Abdo turns the sport around, makes positive change. So strong leadership, is key in getting through these hard times. What we've seen with UEFA, the IOC, FIFA, World Rugby, whatever, is ad hoc leadership where there's no universal agreement from country to country. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with the Olympics. We don't know what's going to happen with the Euros in 2021, if they're going to take place at all. But the financial implications, if they don't, are just as bad as if they do without fans. Because what has been proven is fans are more crucial than the top level professional sports we care to admit. The TV companies hold far too much sway over how sport operates as a business. And the battle between the TV companies and professional sport has reached a point now where, they are at loggerheads over TV deals, over media deals, and the direction, of how sports are governed and what direction they take. That is one thing that is clear. I do think the issue is more serious than people realise. I really do. I think a lot of teams could go under. And with the announcement, as I started this live stream with the UK government announcing that its plan to have fans back in the stadium from the 1st of October has been scrapped. And it was only provisional. This is what a lot of people have failed to take into consideration, is the UK and then the Scottish government's plans to have fans in stadiums were provisional dates that were subject to change. The authorities have decided the risks are still too great. We're going to push these dates back indefinitely. And the Scottish government now pushed it back to, I think, the middle of the first week of October. And then that will be reassessed. And the UK government has decided, bang, we're just going to kick this down the road. Oh, yeah, we were told that the Premier League was very profitable without fans being there. But actually, fan power was feared by the governing bodies, by the clubs, by the owners. And what has actually turned out is they were actually in a dire financial straits long before COVID. If clubs the size of Liverpool and Man United and Tottenham and Premier League clubs were furloughing non-playing staff within weeks of the shutdown, within days, and Man United are announcing 5 million losses per day, £5 million lost per day in lost revenue or lost income, it shows how valuable we as match-going fans or just buying merchandise sales and going to games and buying going even getting a burger or a pint in the at the ground. Concessions. That's it. Go to the concession stand. Oh no, the fans definitely know they have the power. This is what the owners and the authorities feared: is that we would put our tribal differences aside and work for a common good for the fan. And I think the TV companies realise that as well. The TV companies, the clubs, the governing bodies have basically made decisions without really thinking how it impacts the fan. They've taken us for granted. And yeah, we were told the lie. Oh yeah, the ticket prices would stay low with the TV deal, would be sustainable. Viewership would be great. be healthy. Since the 1992 Sky Sports TV deal here in the UK, look at the amount of clubs that have gone into administration. Look at the amount of clubs that are now going bust. We were told the lie that it'd be good for the game. All levels of the game would benefit. I'm not seeing that benefit. All I'm seeing is that the top end talent getting massively overinflated wages. Ticket prices going through the roof. And a drop in quality in the overall play that we see on the pitch. That's what I believe is happening. I think the quality level is less. The ticket price for the commodity is higher. And the TV deals are unsustainable financially for the average fan to pay. I don't have Sky Sports. I don't have BT Sport. I cannot justify paying that much money per month, per year, on a fixed contract long term. I cannot justify it, not with the salaries that I've been earning and the wages I've been earning, but also just on the sheer principle. We were told it would be sustainable for fans. It's not. It unfortunately isn't. And this is something that has to be taken into consideration. It hasn't worked out the way it should have. On the side of how things are going long term, clubs could go out of business, and then the TV company has a harder sell to the clubs, saying, "Well, your product's now worth less. We're going to pay you less." So the TV companies still have a huge bearing on the structure of the game. The change of kickoff times, for example, to suit TV audience, mostly overseas TV audience from the big media companies, has angered fans. Fans don't like the TV blackout at 3 o'clock. Fans don't like, and that was designed to protect attendances. People are still staying away from games. Look at the attendances in the lower leagues; they are dreadful. 3 o'clock TV blackout for Saturday games was designed to protect attendances at grounds. Then look at the lower leagues and some of the Premier League clubs with lots of empty seats. Look at the FA Cup. Look at the League Cup. Fans are staying away. There is a growing discontent within fan bases. So if clubs go out of business, that's going to affect the TV company's revenue as well. So the lie they've told us for the best part of 30 years is the game would benefit at all levels is not true. The way the TV money is distributed is a mess. But it's too weighted at the top, which has damaged the lower level. And the same can be said in other sports around the world. The TV deals are too weighted to the top of the tree, and not enough even distribution at the lower levels, which support the top level with player development, recruitment. It doesn't matter if it's a promotion relegation system or a draft system like the NHL or the NFL has, or the NBA or Major League Baseball. The NBA and the NHL have minor league affiliates. The NFL has college. But the TV money supports the lower level. And you look at the minor league affiliates that the major leagues have in the US, their TV deals are shocking. And they're going to struggle to survive this pandemic. You look at, I always say this, you take a tower block, a skyscraper, you weaken the base of the skyscraper, the building falls down. You're taking, let's say, we'll take Bury, we'll take Macclesfield, we'll take Southend. Bolton Wanderers are struggling as well. Portsmouth points and Plymouth were both at points facing going out of existence. Chester City's gone. Boston United's gone. You start taking away bits at the bottom. Eventually, it'll weaken the structure and it will tumble down. Let's say it's a 92-story building and you take 60 stories out, it's going to collapse. There are massive concerns about what the sport's going to look like long term. And what fans have been saying is we want more free-to-air coverage. If that means slightly less money going into the top level, so be it. But it then increases the audience that you get, and it increases the TV exposure that the lower levels get. V'landys is the guy who runs the Australian Rugby League Commission. He's the boss of rugby league in Australia. He's the guy who's managed to get the NRL back and running by May 28th and get fans in attendance within 7 weeks. So when everything shut down, within 8 weeks of the NRL shutting down, it was up and running again. He's the guy who's responsible in turning around rugby league's fortunes. And there are still issues with the NRL, and there are rule changes being experimented with this week. But there were concerns that some NRL teams would go out of business, and there were concerns that, there were concerns that the NRL would cease to exist, that the actual league would stop existing if they didn't get play resumed. They got play resumed within 8 weeks. So with strong leadership, it shows what can be done when you have a can-do attitude and you don't take no crap. And he did have battles with the TV companies. You've got Foxtel, which is similar to our version of Sky, and BT, the subscription TV provider. And you had Channel 9, which is similar to ITV out in Australia. And Channel 9 dug their heels in and basically threatened the competition's survival by basically saying, well, actually, we can save money if we don't show rugby league. But under Australian law, you have to have a proportion of games on free-to-air. You can't have every game on subscription. It's one of those sporting leagues that has the anti-siphoning laws. So you have to have free-to-air coverage. This is something we need in the UK desperately need in the UK. No, it doesn't. There's no teams in Northern Territory, South Australia, or Western Australia. The battle was that Channel 9, which is the free-to-air broadcaster, was being a bit difficult when it came to the TV rights and paying money for a product that would not meet what they wanted. And they managed to get a 20-round competition with finals, with State of Origin, and they managed to get it on. But there were times in the middle of the lockdown that we weren't sure if the NRL was going to resume. And it was because of a TV company throwing its weight around. And the governing body refused to be bullied by the TV company and stood up to them. And the sport won. So it is doable if there is strong leadership. What we've seen in most sports governance is weak leadership, where the TV company's calling the tune about when games are played, what time they kick off, what time they finish. They look at ratings of the more popular teams, so they try it. So the fixture list is done for TV. Fans don't like that, but unfortunately, the TV companies are really swinging their weight around when it comes to professional sport, and it's having catastrophic consequences. And fans are starting to push back. So, is there even civilization in Australia? Yeah, Alice Springs. That's a place. There's quite a few sizable towns inland in Australia. Alice Springs is the most famous, but there is people living away from the coasts in Australia. It's a very surprising country. It's a very interesting country. It's a country that I want to visit and explore because it is so interesting. If I had the money and the time, I would happily. I have the time. I don't have the money. I would happily explore Australia for 3 to 6 months. Just if I had the money, just to go from each territory and state and really give it an exploration. But it does cost a lot of money to go there. The TV companies are holding sport to ransom, and this is the problem. We've allowed too much power to go into the TV companies' hands, and the governance of the sports have been weak, and they basically meekly do what the TV companies say. And having no fans in attendance, this is starting to hurt the TV companies a little bit. So this is what would happen if we all boycotted games and actually damaged their product. What I've been arguing is, we'll talk about the NBA and the NFL. I mean, they are having a ratings drop on last year. No doubt on that. The NBA has obviously been affected by COVID, but they would have normally be starting the season now rather than finishing the season now. But back to the TV companies and weak leadership. Oh, come on. When you've got media companies basically saying to sports how they should govern themselves, rule changes to suit TV companies rather than actual benefit the sport. Uh, when you've got the extortionate wages that the top level sportsmen are paid. Yeah, I know their careers are short, but that is obscene. The obscene amounts of money that some of these athletes make. The ticket prices that we are expected to pay as fans. What I've noticed is those sports that are more reliant on fans and attendance have more sustainable ticket prices, and the the, the athletes, the players of those leagues that are more reliant on fan attendance are actually paid a more reasonable salary. They're still paid more than the average worker, but they're paid a more reasonable salary, and it's a more sustainable product. Until you have a lockdown like this, where it actually becomes unsustainable to play matches, and you just have to suspend the season, which then affects the players because they're not getting paid. But the irony is, those sports that rely less on TV deals and more on fans and attendance, yes, they make less money, but it's a more sustainable model going forward, and it's more sustainable for fans and the sport in general. The irony behind that, the TV companies, it hasn't worked how it should have worked, and on the political side of things, yes, sport and politics is a dangerous game. We've seen sport and politics in the Olympics for decades, dating back to the 80s during the Cold War, with the boycotts in 1980 and 1984. And that got very political, very, very political, that did. And, sport and politics is a dangerous game. And what we've seen is how divisive that makes things. To me personally, I couldn't give a toss. Personally, my personal opinion, but I also do believe sports should be apolitical. If players have any issues, they've got unions that they're members of to raise those issues with their players' unions. That's the best way. That's the best way, in my view, to solve issues is to go through the union process. But again, look at the media companies and how they're forcing the agenda with changing how they're presenting lineups. That I'm not keen on. Le Tissier and Tomo, whether you like their views, is irrelevant. They had done nothing wrong, but they've lost their jobs. But what, Sue Barker's been replaced by Alex Scott. God forbid I'm never watching Questions for ever again. Not because Alex Scott is female, because Sue Barker's female. Not because she's black, because she's a crap journalist. But if you criticise these people, you're labelled a racist or a sexist or a homophobe. And I'm like, Claire Balding's been on my TV screen for 25 years as a viewer. I don't care that she's a lesbian. I don't care that she's female. I care that she's competent. This is what gets me. If they're talking about social justice, these social justice warriors, most of them are white and middle class anyway, which is hilarious. They've never had to live in poverty and on the breadline and hand to mouth in social housing, or in suburbs that, when I say suburbs, I mean districts that have high crime rates and high murder rates and low low education rates. It makes me want to rip my hair out. The best way to increase diversity is from the grassroots. You go out into the community and you see what the community, want. Claire Balding hasn't been got rid of his Sue Barker. I've got hair. I just don't have a lot of it anymore. I had hair. I shaved it all off because it got too long. But when you look at forced diversity, it creates division. And you have natural diversity because it's been encouraged from the grassroots. We're told by the mainstream media that, and Jonathan Pye, the satirist comedian, says this very, very well. That's not his real name, by the way. Is that we must seek out the oppression wherever we look. We must seek out the division wherever we look. For me, sport should be open. It should be an escape from our social worries. It should be an escape. I have never once in my life seen racism or homophobia at an ice hockey match in this country. That's not to say that that doesn't exist and isn't a problem, but I personally have never seen it. I've seen some pretty vile stuff at football, not gonna lie. But racism wasn't the worst thing I've seen. It didn't happen as much as the media says it's happening at matches. It happens. I've seen more homophobia and just general vile behaviour, but that's another thing entirely. But I never personally came across racist chanting when I went to football as a teenager. That doesn't say it doesn't exist, but when we're told to seek out prejudice wherever I'm thinking to myself, if Sue Barker, Claire Balding, and who else, Fiona Bruce, all these female presenters who dealt with sport or politics on the TV have been in their jobs for over 20 years plus. I mean, Sue Barker's been a media face for 30 years plus. You know, why is it being forced upon us when actually the BBC already meets its diversity, drive? It's already doing its diversity. Uh, the British basketball team is all about is that diversity. The media will tell you it's diversity. Oh, look, you have to look at the social economics of certain sports. Baseball is heavily favoured by the Latino population in the US. You know, it's one of their favourite sports. Is baseball. Basketball is heavily favoured by the Afro-Caribbean community, the African community, Black American community in the US because it's a social economic thing. The ice hockey, again, is more favoured on the East Coast and the border region with Canada in the US because, again, it's social economics and it's again, that's where the winters are harshest in the US. So it's a winter sport, and yes, it's predominantly white. Um, the NFL is quite a mixed bag. Ironically, it's a very mixed bag. There's a lot of Polynesians who play in the NFL, so you have to look at the social economics behind it as well, and the cultural stuff behind it, and why certain groups prefer certain sports. That's not to say black people don't watch ice hockey. I mean, Snoop Dogg is a massive LA Kings fan. Snoop Dogg is a massive, massive LA Kings fan. He loves the NHL. You wouldn't think that, but he loves the NHL. Um, it, it it is what it is. I think uh, I don't think hockey doesn't do a good job of getting more ethnic people involved in the sport. I mean, uh, there are some boundaries in place, and a lot of that is historical. But if you look at it, it's more diverse than people realise. There's a lot of First Nations players playing, or those with Native American descent. There are people of mixed race background playing, but it's a very expensive sport to get involved with. Basketball, you just need a couple of mates, a court, and a ball. You look at soccer, football. Look at the diversity actually in the playing group. Everyone can play that. Just have a kick about. Rugby union and rugby league. I mean, rugby league I think could do more, um, but you look at the areas in which it's been played. You look at the communities in which it's been played. Rugby union. When Mario Itoje has come out and said he hasn't actually experienced racism, he's right. At no point when I was playing rugby did we have any discussion about race being an issue, being a barrier. We had people from all sorts of backgrounds playing. You know, um, so there is a minority who make this an issue. The media blows it up bigger than it is because it wants to sell newspapers. It wants us to get to watch its programs. It wants us to go on their websites and give them clicks so they get advertising revenue. They want the money so they can justify writing the crap. And uh, what I don't get is the PC bullshit. the right wing's loving this right now because they're seizing upon this and hijacking and gaslighting the debate that we're having. Because the reasonable debate that we're having is, yeah, we're getting frustrated with the politics getting involved in sport in a negative way. It's becoming more divisive. We don't like it. Do I agree that there should be more social justice? Yes, on a variety of topics, not just race relations. Because guess what? We're all one race, by the way. But yeah, and community relations with various minority groups. I do believe that there should be a level playing field, and that there are issues with institutional problems within the police, within recruitment in certain industries. Yeah, we could do more to encourage women to join the building trade. We could do more to encourage, minority groups to involve themselves in social activities in certain sectors of the economy. There's a lot that we could do. But the left wing are gaslighting a situation where a known wanted criminal, regardless of race and gender, colour of his skin, should I say, who was wanted on several warrants in a different state, had a high amount of drugs in his system, was resisting arrest. Did the police officer then overexert his authority? Absolutely. Were other police officers present who could have done something to stop that arrest getting into what has now become manslaughter murder trial? Yes. So was there failings from the police? If you look at the police involved that day, one was mixed race, one was Asian, one was white. So therefore that in itself, that in itself, creates an issue. My phone's just gone off because I've had a job notification. Yeah, I lost my job the other day. That's why I'm recording this. Let's have a look. What's this? Right. So, no, well, it's complicated. I've resigned for personal reasons. It's complicated. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it on here. I think a lot of it's to do with welfare, ironically, and personal welfare, not actual welfare being on benefits. It's to do with employee welfare. Like when I talk about athlete welfare and looking after and making sure the athletes are okay, and making sure that they're being looked after, that their well-being, education opportunities, training opportunities post sport. That's the sort of thing that I go on. Yeah, look, we can go into the figures and try and have the open-minded, pragmatic debate. But if you bring up the numbers, this is why, again, look, we're talking about a political issue, not to do with sport. And already it's detracting from the debates that we've been having about the situation that sport as a social thing is finding itself where, yeah, there could be issues with and this is where the furlough scheme, when football clubs were furloughing non-playing staff, they were faced a lot of negative criticism in the media because of the amount of money that the football makes. And we were told for years they could survive without fans, and it turned out they really couldn't. So it turned out the football clubs and the FA and the Premier League were lying to us about the financial situation that professional football found itself in this country. I am applying. I just had a message come through about a job notification, which I'm going to discuss with the potential employer. But it's a fair distance away, so I've got to do about an hour's commute to get to work if I get this job, which is going to be a right pain in the arse, but has to be done in order to pay the bills and to put food on the table. Yes. It's going to be different. It's factory work, I think, so it's slightly different, but at the same time, I can live with that. I could live with a change of pace from what I was doing. I love working outdoors. I mean, I'm trying to, get into back into what I was doing, but at the same time, I've obviously got to factor up me and what's good for me. But And I'm thinking about doing an online university course as well, and trying to change things. And I will be moving again in February, so I just need something to get me through the next few months, and then I can assess things after Christmas. On the side of cutting staff but not players' wages, yeah, the Gareth Bale situation at Tottenham, for example, this is one of the clubs that was heavily hammered in the press for furloughing non-playing staff. Yet they've just signed Gareth Bale, the most overpaid player in the world, and they're paying a proportion of his wages, not all of his wages, but a majority of the wages. Real Madrid are obviously paying some money. How can they justify that? This is where I said football cannot justify these transfers, yet transfers are still being made. And they're still paying over 300 grand a week. This is a club, okay, that in recent seasons has turned down player requests for wage increases. So I use Danny Rose because Danny Rose always makes himself a very good example because he's always an arse. And they go, why are you picking Danny Rose for? Because he's black. No, it's because he's a twat. Danny Rose said, I'm on 50 grand a week, I want 100. So he asked for a wage increase, right? Okay. And, his wage increase was turned down. He ended up going on loan to Newcastle. They were like, we're not willing to pay you double your wages. You're not good enough. Yet they've just justified, signing Bale on 300 grand a week, but they wouldn't give, Danny Rose a 50 grand a week increase. But I think that in itself is obscene. Obscene. I compare it to how much it would take me. God, I was just under. Let's say I was under. I think my official wage before overtime was 17,800 a year. Okay, and we'll call it 20. We'll round it up to 20. Okay, so take home and that includes that. I say, well, let's say I'm earning 20k a year, right? And that's before taxes. Remember that, before taxes. Bale's earning 600 grand a week. Okay, a week. That would take me a very long time to earn. That would take me shit. I think now is it 30 or 300 years? I think it's 30 years. 30 years to earn that. He earns that in a week. What he earns in a week would take me 30 years to earn. 30 years. He's still getting paid for 600 grand a week. They're splitting the wages 50-50. So he's earning 600k a week. That would take me 30 years. I would be 60 by the time I earned that amount of money. 60 from now. 60. If I'm going by the wage that I was earning with a few adjustments as an approximate, okay, from what I was earning over the last year and a half, that would take me 30 years. So I'll be in my late 50s, early 60s by the time I'd earned that amount of money. And that's before tax is involved. You then add tax to that, I still would never earn that amount of money, in my lifetime after tax. I would still come up short. That is how obscene these wages. So if you take that with a 50% tax rate, okay, that's still 300 grand a week after tax. So, and that would take me 15 years to earn before I pay any tax. 15 years. I would be 45 by the time, 46. I'll be in my mid 40s by the time I'd earn that much money. And that is again before I have to pay tax. That in itself is obscene. And if the average wage is 40 grand a week as of last season, average, that would take me 2 years before tax to earn. 2 years. They earn in a week what I earn in a year after tax. A week. That is ridiculous. And now that Bale's come in, that bumps up the average. It's just, I think that is, utterly, stunning. Absolutely stunning. How can the players justify it? Yeah, their careers are a lot shorter. Absolutely, a pretty solid player could do a 15, 20-year career. when you say highest average earners, the NFL and NBA and Major League Baseball is skewed by the top end talent, earning the big mega deals, mega deals. But the average player in those leagues actually doesn't get paid that much. The average wage is higher because the top end talent is overpaid, and the lower end talent is massively underpaid and gets treated like utter crap. They are literally used as wage slaves, especially in the NFL with the injuries that they sustain, the concussions, the body injuries, the internal damage that their organs take. They're not on a lot of money a year. They're on like 60 grand a year. Whereas Mahomes, because of his salary per week, that's 800 grand a week. I think 1.1 million. That bumps up the average salary earnings, but actually the lower level earners don't get paid as much as you think. Whereas in the Premier League, it's more evenly distributed across the board. So that's a distortion on the average salary, really. Very few players in the NFL and NBA actually earn the big mega money per year per contract. If you work it out, the lower end talent in those sports actually doesn't get paid a lot. They get paid pittance in comparison with there's a massive, massive disparity. And the NFL is known for that. The NHL is a bit different. That's a little bit more even across the playing field. The average salary per year is about 2.6 to 3 million US dollars per year. And a lot of them, apart from the star players, a lot of them, because they're not a big sell for the organization, they end up in poverty, they end up broke, they end up homeless. There's no aftercare. There's none of that. So it's only the big name talent that earns the big money. It's obscene how much the MLS. I don't know what the MLS earns. I know there's a salary cap in place. They still earn decent wage. They're still better paid than the average human. They earn decent money. The money isn't massive, but there's been a few obviously marquee signings going over there in the last 20 years. So your David Beckhams, your Steven Gerrards, your Andrea Pirlo's, your Kaká's, they've gone over there to play in the last couple of decades. So that then creates interest in marketing, and then you can sell more product. Ibrahimovic. So there's some big name players that have played in the MLS, but their salaries, I think they're more reasonable, but they're still decent. There's still some decent money there. So there is obviously, when big name talent goes over there to play, it does create interest, and I think I look at professional sport, and when in like the Australians, like the NRL and the AFL, and they're talking about 600 grand a year salary and justify 1.2 million per year salary, I'm thinking that's still a lot of money. That's still a lot of money. They're still on far better money than I'll ever be, and it will still take me 10, 15, 20, 30 years to earn the amount of money they earn a year in my lifetime. So the new Premier League slogan, "Paid better than average." I mean, I think this is the problem when we were talking about the TV companies having a lot of sway. The players have got greedy, and it's not necessarily the players' fault because there's no salary cap. The issue lies with their agents and the clubs, and the agents manipulating the situation. And player agents, there's a lack of transparency there. And this is a debate that goes across sport, is that player agents have a lot of influence as well, a negative influence, and there's not enough done to regulate player agents. Not enough is done, and that is a concern. Is that the lack of regulation when it comes to player agents, agents' fees, contracts, how they're negotiated, it is a concern, and it's a concern that goes from European football through to the rugby league in the NRL. There's been massive debate about the role of player agents and player agencies, like representatives and what they call them. So there's been a massive debate in the last couple of years in the NRL, and the AFL about the role of player agents and how they are actually causing a lot of problems because they operate in salary cap systems. European football, the role of player agents and player agencies, like, representative agencies, because they might, some of these player agents are above board. They are, and they are very, very successful in what they do. They have big offices, and they'll have thousands of sporting clients that they represent in professionals, thousands. And they'll even represent managers and coaches and assistant coaches and clubs as a whole. And they will have a dedicated team to a certain sport. So you'll go into some of these big player agencies, and they'll have a section dedicated to basketball, the NBA, and the NBA affiliate. You'll have a MLS and the affiliate leagues and the minor leagues. You'll have NHL and the minor leagues. You'll have NFL and the CFL, and then the collegiate system. You'll have NASCAR. You'll have other forms of motorsport, and then you go through, and they'll have the various sporting departments of the various, athlete agents who are involved. And they're the best run ones, because if they're a big sports agency, they're more they have to be transparent, because they have to do their business rates and all that. It's the individual player agents who are very murky in the background, who are the ones that are unregulated and not overly, because it's called sports management, basically. It's basically the industry. It's called sports asset management. That's a good way of looking at it. And the better ones are the ones that are the big ones that employ many player agents and sports managers, right? And they do treat it like a normal office job. And the clients come in, I'm due for a new contract extension, and they will have proper meetings in boardrooms with the club and the player and the agent. They'll go, right, this is what we can thrash out. We can work out something positive. The best player agent relationships is when you see them once a year to sort out your contract extension. That's it. But the issue is there are a growing number of player representatives, player agents, sports management facilitators, as you want to call them, who are manipulating the sports market in the sense of player wages, player contracts, sponsorship contracts, third-party payments, managers' contracts as well, and they are manipulating the market. That if we were to do that on the stock exchange, if we were to do that in buying shares in a company, manipulating shares in a company, be it a PLC or a private, we would go to jail. It's called fraud. But it's somehow in sports contracts they're allowed to do it. Do I listen to any sports podcasts? Yes, I do. I listen to the Spitting Chiglets because I watch some of their stuff on YouTube. I listen to the Matty Johns podcast, which is a rugby league one. And I listen to a few others that are floating around. I also have. Yes, but it's sponsored by Barstool. There are, they've actually on the podcast, they have made reference to the fact that Barstool Sports, there has been some controversy surrounding Barstool Sports, and I do not endorse everything that Barstool Sports says and does. It's a very interesting podcast. I haven't listened to it for a while, but I've gone a little bit off hockey in the last couple of months. I'm a hardcore fan, but I've just turned off a little bit. I've just had to tune it off. Dave Portnoy. He's been highlighted as a very controversial figure in Barstool Sports that has made a lot of controversial statements and actions that have been on social media and more widely in the public domain that have caused some controversy. I have read up on certain things. I'm not a big fan of Barstool Sports, so Spitting Chicklets, well, I do enjoy listening to the ex-players and getting some of the ex-players on, because it's linked with Barstool Sports. That has damaged them. Whitney and then Kyle have said, Paul Bizanet at the Biz have basically said, our connection to Barstool Sports is, why that's damaged us a little bit. They've said it in the podcast, the links to Barstool have caused some issues with our brand as Spitting Chicklets, as in these ex-players. It has caused some issues with us trying to sell ourselves and make the podcast successful, make our programming successful. And Barstool Sports, there is this attitude of toxic masculinity and various bits and pieces, and there's been some very controversial things that have happened. And you hear it in the background when you're researching sports stuff, when you're researching a sports story, and you're reading up the media, and you come across a Barstool Sports article or something related to Barstool Sports. There is a lot of controversy around it and negativity, and that is a problem. If you're working for that organisation, you might go, shit, I might want to go elsewhere. I might want to look at a different independent media provider website or mainstream if I want to be a journalist or get my information. You might want to distance yourself from that organisation. On the point of players getting a lot of money very young, yes, a lot of them are paid a lot of money very, very, very young, and then expected to perform at the level that their salary dictates. And that puts a lot of pressure on an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old. When I was 18 to 21, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a bit lost, and I bounced from job to job and went back to college and worked in a variety of factory and warehouse jobs for a while. And I didn't really settle on a career path, and I was a bit lost. But it's a difficult one. I only got into YouTube when I was, I think, in my late 20s. I think I was 27. I was 27 when I started, actively taking and making video content seriously. It took me until I was 27 to post my first video on YouTube, and that in itself tells you something. It took me a long time to find this medium as an outlet to discuss my hobbies and my passions, which is sport. On the side of some of these 18-year-olds, there are some young lads on a large salaries that are under intense media scrutiny, for one. So they're getting battered in the media daily when they have a bad game or a bad performance, or they don't perform at a tournament or event to the standard that's expected of the salary. So they get hammered in the media when they're struggling, be it with injury, confidence, form. And then when they make some errors off the field, they get hammered. And sometimes you have to think, okay, why is this player doing this? Is this a track record of poor behaviour where they're doing drinking too much, recreational drug misuse, they're getting involved in fights and things like that? It happens. And again, they get battered in the media, and we can, as YouTubers. I mean, I've been critical of a lot of athletes. I mean, I'm very critical of Dan Cipriani's off-field antics, but I also think he's one of the best fly halves England's ever produced who hasn't had his opportunity at international level because of his off-field antics. I'm not a fan of Ben Stokes. Is he a talented cricketer? Yes. Is he also an arsehole? Yes. Yes, my first ever video on the channel was making a video of World War III was very likely. Yeah, that was when it was just basically me rambling at a camera on my iPad, feeling sorry for myself after a motorcycle accident where I was a bit bashed up. I think it was before my motorcycle accident, my third one. I just had 2 motorcycle accidents before Christmas. I was really, really down in the dumps, and felt like crap. The first sports video I think I did was either the Newcastle United tax investigation or Neymar getting transferred to PSG. That was in my old house. That was in my old bedroom, my old apartment. I moved there a year ago. That was in my old bedroom in my old house 3.5 years ago. And I at the time I was in a very bad place mentally and physically. I was ill. I wasn't doing very well. You could see in my face I was having issues with addiction and depression and recovering, which I still am recovering from the motorcycle accidents with my back and my shoulder. But that wasn't me talking about sport. That was me just grumbling and complaining online and just generally being a cynical, bitter individual. And yeah, I think in the Newcastle West Ham tax scandal, I refer to I'm going to quote myself. I refer to Mike Ashley as the biggest cunt this country's ever produced. I think that's the video where I basically just called Mike Ashley a massive women's vagina. But yeah, that's when I realised actually sport, is an interesting one. And then the Neymar transfer came along within a few days, and then we had the Mark Sampson getting sacked by the England women's team. And that was the first video that made over 100 views, I think. And what got me is people found sport more discussion worthy than a grumpy guy in his late 20s who had hit hard times discussing crap that was going on in the media and my view on it, which I think was the idea, was to have a video diary. And it very quickly evolved into me rambling and shouting and swearing about sport. And then I swore less. There, I made it a bit more PG. But my live streams have the occasional F bomb. And now we're talking about what we're talking about now. Was I into hockey back then? Yeah, I've always been into the NHL. I have been into the NHL since I was 3-4 years old. Cipriani's defence is hit and miss. Some days he's brilliant, some days he's poor. I've seen Cipriani put some great defensive performances in the tackle area, and other games he's shocking. So that's, I think, a mentality issue on the defence side of things. But if you target Cipriani, you can wear him down, basically. Target Cipriani with aggressive ball running off the ball. Defensively, you get his positioning all wrong. One-on-one tackling, he can be half decent. It's just how hard you hit him. But Cipriani's attitude, I think, off the field is what's held him back as a player. His off-field antics has definitely harmed his on-field career. I was having this debate. The other night about players whose off-field indiscretions have harmed their on. I think it was on a live stream. I think, yeah. I was having the debate about off-field indiscretions harming on-field performance, and I think, wash hands, sterilise. Yeah, well, that's nothing's changed in the last 7 months. Then we've still got to wash our hands, which I was doing beforehand anyway. I mean, I wash my hands about 40 times a day right now. I mean, ridiculous. I'm going to have no skin left at this rate. On the side of looking back at some of my old videos, the quality is shocking. My lack of confidence is shocking. And then as you get into the autumn and into the 2017 and into the new year of 2018, I get my laptop. First up, I figure out a few things on the laptop. We get monetized, get demonetized, and that was a big moment. And we go from there. I mean, Gavin Henson making yet another comeback into professional sport. I mean, God, he is going to be hopeless. I did do a lot of epic rants on my live streams. I did go off on a lot of things, going, this guy's this and that. They were funny, but with the change in YouTube and how the policies over content have changed, and advertisers being a bit more picky now, and the change in monetization policy and all that. Well, I love doing this as a hobby, and I would love to make money out of it again. You've got to be more careful, a bit more politically correct, a bit more PG, and you can't just go off on one. I think some of my blow-ups on live streams are hilarious, especially the one which there was one to do with Donald Trump back in, I think, the summer of 2018, where a new viewer said, what were my views on Donald Trump? And I went on an hour and a half, I believe, rampage online about why I think that would why my views were where they were. And then the next night, someone asked the same question, obviously having watched, just to push the buttons. And the person who had asked me the question the night before said, don't do it. I've been there. I made a terrible mistake. Keep it to sport. It's for your own benefit. I remember that one. That was fun. That was in my old games room where I had my old Xbox and TV and stuff. Yeah, I mean, the Rugby League World Cup 3 years ago, I really got into that tournament. And I really started to enjoy it. And yeah, I was very, very popular in Australia, New Zealand, and the South Sea Islands. They really got a lot of interest because the Tongan team had managed to encourage a lot of Kiwi and Australian players to go back to play for Tonga. So you David Feeters, for example, and Mamalos and things like that. And they should have beaten England in that semi-final. They should have. I was stunned with the poor refereeing by Chechen to do with not taking it to the bunker over Fafita touching the ball down when he clearly didn't knock it on. But look, um, that's neither here nor there. You know, that was 3 years ago. The world's changed a lot in 3 years, so we are where we are now. My view on Gavin Henson, I can't see how that's anything but, well, he's obviously kept himself fit to a point, but there's a reason why he couldn't play rugby union anymore. It's because he was injured all the time and he wasn't fit, and it just didn't work out. He had fitness issues. He couldn't play at the same level. He had peaked much earlier than people realised. I think he wasted his talent as well with some of his off-field antics, because he was a brilliant player. He's exceptionally skillful, exceptionally dominant outside centre as a kicking option, can goal kick, can kick from hand, kick on the run, bring players into play with his offloads. But he's a union player, not league. And this is a restart of his career very, very late. Now, obviously, he's kept himself in some kind of physical shape, but there's a reason why he retired from rugby union. It's because he couldn't stay fit. He had a lot of injuries towards the end, couldn't stay fit. And his off-field dramas, his private life was, well, a shambles, really. It was played out very publicly in the media. And, it didn't end very on my opinion of Donald Trump, let's not go there, because this live stream may last about 5 hours. I'm not that I'm a massive fan of the Democrats either, but I'm not American, so it's not my choice to elect Biden or Trump president. It's the American people's, and it's already a very divisive mess over there, which is going to do nothing for anyone. Is rugby popular in Hawaii? I wouldn't know what's popular in Hawaii. I do know that that obviously surfing and water sports, aquatic sports, before you get any dirt ideas, are very popular because it's an island state, and surfing, windsurfing, jet skiing, all that, those kind of aquatic based sports are very, very popular. Swimming is very, very popular. But American football, I think, is I think the most popular sport on the island chain in the state of Hawaii. But there's a lot of South Sea Islanders who live there, and a lot of the US rugby players have come through Hawaii. So in that respect, track and field and American football are very big programs within the University of Hawaii. But a lot of the US rugby players that are playing professionally in Major League Rugby and for the national side have come through from Hawaii. So I can see rugby growing in Hawaii, but again, because of its location, it's very difficult to put. There's no professional major league teams in Hawaii because of its location. In the Pacific, its location is a difficult one. Yeah. Yeah, no, Hawaii is an interesting one. I mean, it's the youngest state in the union. They do have a very interesting sports program, though. So there's that. But I don't want to get involved in the politics side of things. I mean, when it comes to sport and politics, the Trump situation is I'm not an American, therefore I'm is I mean, look, I think the situation in the US is a mess, both on a sporting front, which is shambles, and on a political front, which we want to keep separate from sport. We want to be apolitical for sports fans, but unfortunately, sports got dragged into it, and I think that has harmed the image of sport, because when you've got highly paid athletes, who are dictating to us about social justice, when actually, the uniforms that they wear, and I've had this debate online, and I've been told I'm out of touch. Well, actually, Nike, for example, the people who make the Nike gear for the NFL, the NBA, in those factories in China and Taiwan and Vietnam are on 20 cents an hour, and they're telling me that I've got to worry about social justice. Practice what you preach. Buy from a more sustainable supplier. And the reason why they don't is because Nike want to maximise their profits, and of course these superstars have signed some very lucrative contracts. It's always about the money. It's always about the money. Nike could make less profit, still sell their goods for the same price, but pay their manufacturers supplies a decent wage. And your Air Maxes would still cost 100 quid, which means Nike has to take 30% less profit. And they'd still be a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So there's my opinion on that situation. Oh yeah, Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes, that was hilarious. But every time he presents the Oscars or the Golden Globes, he basically does the same speech where he annihilates the audience, and he doesn't hold back, and it's brilliant because it's very captivating to watch him dig into them, and he doesn't hold back. Doesn't hold back. I can see the comment section's getting a little bit political now. I prefer if it didn't. American sport hasn't dealt with coronavirus very well. That's one thing to say on that. But looking back at how the channel's evolved over the last 3.5 years is where we started the question. I mean, yeah, when I started out, it wasn't a sports channel. When I started out, I didn't have a second channel. That took me over a year to start the second channel. I barely post anything, which is a shame. But there's nothing positive socially to talk about, really. And I don't think I want to post about negative stuff. See what happens if we. I mean, look, a lot of the people in the comment section have been here for the best part of 3 years. I see the same people commenting on videos. It'd be nice to see some new comments. Popping up with content and new subscribers and new comments. Oh yeah, they've changed the flight path from the landing flight path at Heathrow, so now I'm directly beneath the flight path. Whereas I was adjacent before, they've changed the flight path like the third time. So that's a plane going over my bloody flat. That's bloody loud. On a sporting side of things, I started the live stream today because obviously I am near Heathrow. Well, I'm actually in the well, Windsor is, if I'm going by geography, Windsor's that way. It's about 20 miles. Wokingham. Yeah, Windsor's about 20 miles that way from where I am now, and Heathrow is beyond that. It's 25 miles to Heathrow. The flight path is at a slight angle, so it starts over there and it goes over slightly, and the planes start banking about half a mile past my flat. They start banking towards landing at Heathrow, which is an interesting one. I forget which. Yeah, they come in and they bank round and they go round the back of. They swing round and then come over Twickenham Station into Sunbury. They take off in a certain way and they bank out over that way. So coming in, it's like a cab rank. I'm not actually in London. I'm still in Berkshire. I'm still in the. It's just Windsor is obviously East Berkshire. I'm still in East Berkshire, but I'm a little bit further west than Windsor. Wokingham is, well, I'm technically in Champstead, but part of the borough of Wokingham is a bit further west of Bracknell is of Ascot, and then Ascot's south of Windsor and Maidenhead. So I'm southwest of Windsor, right on the south of Berkshire, basically. I'm near Hampshire is only over there. Surrey's only over there. So I'm not very far from the M3. The M4 is up there. The M3 is behind me. The M4 is north of me. So I'm in a bit of area that is sandwiched between two major motorways. It's weird. So I'm not in London necessarily. I'm actually a bit further away from London than I was before. I'm actually about an extra 10, 11 miles further away from London than I was before. So I'm a little bit further west, but not by much. Do I think London Irish will have a fan base in London? Well, London Irish have always been based in the southeast. They've had to battle to share fan base, I think, with Harlequins and Wasps and Saracens over the years. Richmond, Esher. There's a lot of clubs based around the London area that have historical links to London. And the amateur club that's linked to London Irish is still based in Richmond and Sunbury. It's still got their training ground in Sunbury. So They're right on the edge of West London. The fan base, yes, there is a fan base in London for London Irish. Same with Wasps, same with Saracens, same with London Welsh when they existed, London Scottish when they London Japanese. There is fan bases for these rugby clubs in and around London. That's why they've always historically been here. I think Harlequins is the biggest based London club that's still based in London at its historical ground at the Stoop. And do I always support London Irish? I've always had a soft spot for them, but I wouldn't call them a Berkshire club just because they play their home games at the Madejski. A lot of their fan base actually still comes from southwest Surrey, southeast Surrey, northeast Surrey, wherever it is, southwest London, where they were traditionally based. A lot of their fans do actually commute from the outskirts of London and Surrey into Reading for games. But they've grown the fan base locally as well. But the issue is you've also got Newbury up the road, rugby club, and you've got Bracknell Rugby Club as well. And you've also got Reading Rugby Club. There's actually Reading Abbey and Reading Rugby Club. There's two rugby clubs in Reading as well. So while they're the top flight rugby club in the area, they're also competing against a player base and a fan base of the local clubs who play locally. But they have done a lot to improve the footprint of professional rugby union in the area and semi-pro and pro and amateur. And there are pathways between the amateur clubs being, scouts looking at up and coming talent at the semi-pro and amateur club structures as well, and getting the pathways in there. But at the same time, rugby union outside of the top two tiers is really not great for attendances. Football again wins that battle. So lower league football, because there's a better TV deal, and while we're discussing football struggling financially, you look at the lower levels of football, and there is higher attendances for League Two football than Championship rugby. It's just how things work, and again, exposure has something to do with that. And you look at the TV deal that professional club rugby has got, and it's again subscription only sport deals with BT and Sky and Premier Sports, and that harms potential growth that the sport has. So there is that to consider. But same with rugby league. When you get outside of professional levels of rugby league and you go to the semi-pro ranks, the attendance figures aren't great, really. And a lot of clubs, there's only a handful of clubs make a profit on before COVID. So, look, I mean, sport in France on the professional level, there is more free-to-air coverage as well. Something I have noticed with French sport, when you see things like the Tour de France, and then you look at the TV deals that have actually been, signed. I mean, not even mentioning rugby league, by the way. You take Toulouse and Catalan out, there's actually quite a solid player base of rugby league at semi-pro level. The interesting thing with France is the way that, ironically, similar sized population to England, Great Britain, less professional sports teams. There's less professional sports teams. That's what I find really interesting. Similar size, population, twice the geographical area, but similar size population, less professional sports teams. That's what I find absolutely stunning. Is once you get to the third tier of French football, it's semi-pro. So that's what I find interesting. But there is a pretty solid professional sporting base there, and I think rugby is actually, I think, the better professional sport. It's got more money in it, and it's a bit more even across the board with who wins what, and even big clubs can get relegated from the top flight. You're not protected. Good crowds as well at games. Very passionate fan bases. Normally, it's one club per city as well, so that's something that we could look at here. So, yeah, well, again, it's to do with okay, sports professional, but also the media rights deals that are in place and the sponsorship deals that are in place. And French rules in governing sponsorship and TV rights are a lot different to a lot of other Western countries. There is obviously the subscription sports, pay-per-view sports channels. But then you look at the free-to-air channels, and there's a lot of coverage on free-to-air TV of sport. And while the sports are professional, the players, ironically, apart from Rugby Union aside, and you take out a few of the big French clubs, the average salaries are slightly less, but there is more free-to-air coverage. So, you can take out of that what you will. On the side of sustainability, that's something else to look at as well. Sustainability and the health of sport. But French sport, much like British sport, is in the same situation. The French government came out and said no professional sport before September. The Tour de France takes place in the first 3 weeks of September. The irony of that. But they actually started on the last day in August. But the Tour de France was the big sporting event. They've got that completed. There were concerns the Tour de France wouldn't get completed, and they completed that. But fans actually going into stadiums and into arenas, that's something else entirely. That's where we start, getting into that grey area. But France is in a very similar position to the UK when it comes to fans actually being at games and being in attendance, and we just don't know when we're going to see stadiums reopen and some kind of, let's say, 25, 50% capacity, 75% capacity, full capacity. When that actually happens and comes about is what we're going to have to wait and see. But until that announcement is made, there's a lot of uncertainty in sport, and that uncertainty is causing problems, because with uncertainty you see lack of investment and money leaving the sport. That is concerning, and we are seeing big teams struggle without fans being there. So you imagine what the smaller professional teams or those on smaller budgets are feeling right now, and they are in serious financial trouble. So this is serious conversations have to be had about the situation that sport finds itself in. But then we go back to the financial mismanagement that we've seen in recent years, and the massive financial overspend we've seen in recent years, and you take it from there. And that comes down from weak governance. Earlier on, I was asked about what's the best run sport in the world, or how well run is rugby union. We were mentioning Bernard Laporte's facing corruption charges. He's very high up in world rugby, and these are not new charges that he's facing. These are ongoing allegations that date back up to 12 years. Bernard Laporte's been, dogged by corruption allegations. 12 years. Someone that high up in a professional sport's been dogged by corruption allegations quite publicly that have made public headlines and police investigations. Tells you rugby union's got some problems. You could argue that the AFL and NRL are far better run as professional sports, in the sense that they're not international, they're domestic leagues, and they are better run. But even so, there's still massive governance issues there. You could look at football and how badly it's dealt with the pandemic. European football, absolutely, it's been a shambles. No unified policy. It was everyone for themselves. It was a free for all, and there is a breakdown in trust between fans, the clubs, the players, the governing bodies. Every stakeholder is lacking in trust going forward. Rugby league's a mess. The RFL's having to ask for handouts. Cricket's in a shambles. So yeah, it's professional sports made a right ham-fisted attempt at getting through the last 7-8 months. And going forward, it's going to be very, very interesting to see if they've learned any lessons or if there's still going to be issues going forward. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts below. I'm going to leave that there. I've had some very interesting questions, very interesting topics we've discussed. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you, obviously, very, very soon. Thank you.